Over here in the shape section, we are going to play around with the shape tools. Okay, so these are vector um, based drawing tools in Photoshop that let us create simple shapes, and then because they are vector paths, we can also take multiple shapes and add them into one more sort of complicated shape. So for this little scene, again, we're gonna make a little tractor to go along with our landscape here. So I've gotten this image off the web. You'll notice that it isn't, it's at a slight angle to the camera, so it's not a straight profile shot. But because we're dealing with shape here, we're just going to draw this in a more two-dimensional manner. I'm just using this as a reference. Okay, so I'm not trying to duplicate this exactly, just trying to make a sort of two-dimensional simplified shape similar to this tractor. So first thing I'm going to do is turn off the shape background layer, and then I'm going to add a new layer, we'll call it tractor. Alright, way I can see what I'm doing. I'm also going to hit Command semicolon to turn off the guides, so I've got more of a blank slate here. So the shape tools are located here with the rest of the vector based tools, and you've got several different options with the shapes. You've got a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, which lets you choose the number of sides to your shape, a line tool, and then the custom shape tool. So we're going to start with our wheel, so I'm going to select the ellipse tool. You'll notice up here in the options bar at the top of your screen, you can also toggle back between the different tools up here. This is the pen tool, so for doing a little bit more freehand style drawing. And then there's some options over here too. By default, Photoshop is going to open it up as a shape layer. So if I have this selected, my color right now is black, I don't have any style selected, and I've got my my ellipse tool. When I draw it on here, okay, it makes a vector or shape-based layer, okay, based on what I've drawn here. All right, we're going to do it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to choose here path. So when I have path selected, we're just drawing, and I'm going to switch from my layers palette in the bottom right corner here to my path palette so we can see what we're doing. So if you remember, the difference between bitmap and vector graphics is that vectors are based on formulas. So when we're drawing in path mode, all we're doing is basically creating this formula, and then later we can modify it by filling it with a solid color or just filling a stroke color. There's a lot of different things we're going to do. So we're going to draw it first as a path, and then in the shape example, we're just going to add a black outline so we can see it just as a shape. Okay, so hopefully I can get it to look somewhat decent. All right, so we're going to go to our ellipse tool. I'm going to hold the shift key down, and when I hold the shift key down, it allows me to draw a perfect circle. Okay, if I have the rectangle tool selected and I hold the shift key down, it'll draw a perfect square. Okay, so there's my sort of back rear wheel, and we're not too worried about perfect dimensions at this point. We can go back and modify later. So now I'm going to hold down shift and draw my smaller wheel. Okay, I am going to well, no, I'm not. I'm just going to continue like this. So we got our big wheel and our small wheel. I'm going to switch to the rounded rectangle tool. Notice up here there's a section for the radius. I think it starts by default at like 15 or something like that. So I'm gonna choose that first and just draw sort of the main body of the tractor. Okay. So there's a slight rounded corner here. Let's zoom into that area a little bit. Okay. So you can see the slight rounded corner. I'm going to go back to that tool, hit Command Option Z to undo that. And if I want a little bit more of a curve, I can change the radius here. Okay. So there's my all right. So let's draw the main body here. So I'm going to something like so. All right. I'm going to draw another rounded rectangle for this back portion here. Have them intersect a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to switch to the rectangle tool to add a strut here. Back to the oval tool for the seat. Just going to draw it sort of floating out here to begin with. Now remember, we're just looking at basic shapes at this point, all right? We're not worried about perfection. All right, and then draw steering wheel, switch back to the rectangle tool for the steering column. Okay. And maybe another rectangle for the smokestack. Could be a rounded rectangle. We'll just use a regular one here. And then back to the ellipse for sort of slight curve for a headlight. And let me see here. Okay, that looks decent. Okay, so notice I'm going to make this path. You can see in the path layer that it has all of my sort of intersecting shapes down here. And then if I go back to the layer palette, though, there's no content on this layer yet. Okay, again, it's only a formula at this point. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stay on the path layer. I'm going to choose my path selection tool, which is right above the shape tool. It's just a normal looking arrow similar to the move tool. Okay, and I'm going to select all of my shapes by just clicking and dragging a box around them with the path selection tool selected. And what we're going to do is combine, and there's several different ways to combine. I want to just use this one all the way to the left, which is add to the shape area. This allows me to exclude areas. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to actually first click off one of these in the area, in the middle rather, and then switch back. So just add to shape area is selected. Okay, so just the one over to the left. If you hover over it, it gives you the description of what it is. And then I'm going to hit combine. So what happens here is it takes all of those paths and makes it one continuous shape. So modifies the anchor points to make it one continuous shape. All right. Now I still have some work to do because as you see down here, these anchor points aren't connected. So I'm going to do a few things to make that happen. First is I'm going to switch from the path selection tool to the direct selection tool, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. All right. All right, so if I click off for a second, I had the path selection tool selected, and then click back on it with the direct selection tool, it gives me the white anchor points, and that lets me know I can sort of modify them. So I'm going to drag this one in. Why not? Maybe just put that one there. Drag this one here. Connect that one up here. Okay, so that they're locking onto the different layers. I can straighten that out a little bit. I'm going to give the steering wheel a little bit more of a bend to it. Okay. And I'm doing this mostly freehand here, or all freehand at this point. And there are other ways to modify shapes, but this is a good way to get used to working with the tools here. I'm going to leave a little curve in the wheel here. Give it a little something like that. Okay, and then I'm also going to modify my chair. I'm going to drag this one down so it's touching. Make this one down. Something like this. All right. Like so. And let's see what we've got. All right, not too bad. And we could spend more time putting it together, but that's good for our first little demonstration. So we got a basic shape of a tractor now. So I'm going to zoom back out, all right, and see what we got. And I'm going to go back to my layer palette. Notice there's still no content on the tractor layer. And I'm going to turn my shape background layer on. Okay, look, even though the layer is behind it, because this is still just a path, it appears as if the background is on top of the shape. All right. So now we're going to add an actual stroke to it so that just the outline has some content to it. Okay. So the way I'm going to do that is layer, new fill layer, and I'm going to choose solid color and say OK. Now by default, okay, it's going to just turn it black and it's going to be a solid color. So I'm going to say OK. Then I'm going to go up here to my styles palette. So you've got color, swatches, and styles. All right, and there is one style in here that has a 1 pixel stroke and a 0% fill opacity. So I'm going to click on that. It's usually, in the first row here, the last one. Oops. Yeah, as you see, if I add these different styles, I can get all kinds of funky effects. But since we're dealing with shape alone right now, we want to just stick with shape. So I'm going to choose that style, but then I'm going to come back in here, and you notice now that the layer has some content. Okay, you see the vector shape over here. Okay, and then this is the fill layer. With a fill, it's showing up as black, but then we have an effect on here, a style, which is only filling in a 1 pixel line around the entire vector. Okay. So I'm going to double click here to open up my layer styles, and I'm just going to modify the size of the stroke to make it a little thicker. Let's say 3. Actually, I can make it a little thicker than that even. Let's go with 4 and say OK. All right. So let's place our tractor, and the way we do that is again path selection tool, and now I can drag it and let's put it more over to the side here so that we can still see our road a little bit. All right, let's go back to this one to refer. Yeah, that looks okay. Maybe I'll bring it down a little bit. Good. All right, so now back on the shape background, back with the eraser, zoom back in a little bit, and I actually probably have less erasing to do now too, so that's a bonus. All right, I'm just removing some of the background. Change my size. This little. You can see that there's a few imperfections here. When I joined paths, it still has a little bit of content there, separate from the main outline of the shape, but it's fairly unnoticeable at this point, and especially when we add a fill color. All right, so let's zoom back out, and there we have. Now that tractor looks a little bit better, but hey, why not? All right, so here's our tractor. Okay, so through just the use of the shape tools, okay, and combining them into a slightly more complicated shape, we can tell that that's a tractor. At least I hope so. All right, especially given the rest of the background. All right, it's not the world's best tractor, but it at least gives you an idea of how to use those shape tools to make some simple objects.